welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel. Also consider clicking the notifications bell if you want to see when I will post a new video. Also, if you are interested in a private reading, I do readings in astrology on a variety of topics ranging from relationship readings to career to transits for 2-3 years, or solar return charts or predictions for 1 year, etc. You are free to email me at the email address that I will leave in the video description, and I can send you a pricing list and reading options and any other details that you might require. Also, I want to mention that I have started membership options on this channel, and the short of it, just to give you the short perks that you will get if you choose to join the membership section, you will get 1 extra video per month for each membership stage or tier. So for the first tier, you will get 1 extra video per month. For the second tier, you will get 2 extra videos per month, so you will have access to level 1 and level 2 videos. And for level 3 or third tier, you will get 3 extra videos per month. The level 1 and level 3 videos are going to be on a variety of topics, so basically anything related to astrology, but it will be content that is not shown on my regular usual videos, right? So this is members only exclusive content, and it can range from, tips and tricks on how to read a horoscope to, I haven't done this yet, but I plan on doing maybe members only astrological synastry for famous couples, for instance, or the analysis of famous people's horoscopes, but then I can also get into divisional charts, etc., etc. So all kinds of things. The level 1 or second tier of membership options is especially related to synastry astrology topics, meaning relationship-oriented astrology. So this could be things like how to discover which kind of partner archetype is right for you according to your horoscope, or it could be, again, different characteristics, whether you're going to have a good marriage according to your horoscope or a less than stellar marriage. But you can find more concrete examples in the lists that you will find in the video description, because I have added the playlists where you can already see all the videos that I have posted in each members section. So yeah, you can see what videos you will have access to from the ones that I have already done. But I will continue to post, like I said, 1 extra video per month for each level of membership. And in addition to that, in the members only section, you will have access to members only polls, and you will also have priority when it comes to getting your comments replied to on my channel. And you will also have stickers that basically show up next to your username that show that you are a member, and a couple of exclusive emojis. All right, so that's pretty much all the perks that you can have as a member on my channel. If you're curious, you can check the video description for more details as well, or you can click the join button under any of my videos to also see the prices, because the prices will be shown in your local currency. All right, in addition to the members only section, I also have a tarot channel, and I post there semi-regularly, and I will be linking the tarot channel in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. It's called Martine's Tarot. So if you are curious about tarot, if you're into it, maybe check out my channel, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening to this intro. And now I'm going to get straight into today's topic. Okay, so after another pause, I'm starting the third part of this recording. I don't even know if I'm going to manage to load this video in in one video on YouTube, because it might be too long. I'm going to see how I'm going to handle that. Anyway, so I know I was talking about when I started to take ssris and all the side effects that I um, experienced. And overall, what that whole experience was like. So let me just start with some of the side effects that I experienced during this time. So as I had started to say, I was experiencing a congested nose, and I think that lasted about the first month or so. After the first month, I went to see my psychiatrist again, and I told him that I was taking 5 milligrams of Cipralex and zero point 0.5 of Xanax per day. And I said that, and he seemed confused because, again, as I explained, I think he forgot to tell me that I was supposed to increase the dosage after about 2 weeks. But I said, I'm fine with taking 5 milligrams. I feel okay-ish right now. I don't see the point of increasing it. And he said, okay, if you feel comfortable with this, just keep taking the 5 milligrams. And within the first month, like I said, so I think my nose was congested. It's like no matter what I did, I was taking some pills to decongest it. Nothing was working. I actually had to, I think I mentioned this before, I had to breathe through my mouth for like the first 3 weeks or so, almost entirely, especially during the night, which was extremely frustrating. Aside from that, some weird side effects that I noticed were I was going swimming. Every now and then I go swimming, although right now I haven't been since like January, but whatever. But I decided to go swimming after I started taking the Cipralex at some point, I think after about 2 months or so. And a weird thing that I noticed was that it was really hard for me to get going. Like I had much lower energy at the onset of the workout or any kind of workout that I tried. I was having less energy. It was harder for me to start to get myself to increase the level of energy where I can sustain it. But on the other hand, my endurance seemed to be bigger than usual. Again, this could be just very specific impacts that the pills had on my body and my brain, but it was just something that I noticed. Overall, something that happened throughout this experience, especially once the drugs, the Cipralex especially, really started to sink in after about the 6-week mark, was this general sense of tiredness. And especially for someone like me, who I am almost 100% sure that I have ADHD, because I have like literally every symptom in the book and I've had them since I was a child. And for someone with ADHD who already struggles to focus and to be organized and all this stuff, it was making things much, much worse. Like after about 2 months in, I had this general brain fog, this sense of tiredness. Like on the one hand, the good part about this was that roughly, if I had to estimate, 60 to 70% of my anxiety was gone. And I do remember the whole time when I was taking the pills that was the biggest relief. Like it was such a relief to just have a break from feelings almost in general, like not just anxiety. And this is where it gets into the negative part, which is that not only did I have less anxiety, but the longer I was on them, the less of everything I felt, basically. So I just felt, again, I wasn't really angry, like I just didn't care. I didn't have emotions, but because I didn't have emotions, I also did not have any motivation. And like I said, my focus was just shit, like, pardon my French, but literally and all throughout this time when I was taking the pills, I was not working, which I think is worth mentioning. And this was because I had lost my job. I had mentioned this in the beginning. This is how, the whole downward spiral started. And, I had lost my job, so, I went on these drugs, I think, shortly after that happened, within less than a month after I lost my job, I think a month or 2 months. And then I was unemployed for, like, a long time, I think about 6 months. I don't even remember how active I was on my astrology channel at that time, even though, ironically, I would have had more time to focus on it because I was unemployed, but I was in such a bad shape mentally because of these pills. Like, I just could not get my shit together. It's like, not only did I not get my shit together, but I was not getting ideas either. Like normally, I'm a person who gets loads of ideas. This is how I do the videos on my channel. And I usually, normally my normal mind is like having at least 100, thoughts somewhere floating around in the cloud of my brain at the same time, and when I was on Cyberlex, it was like nothing. It was just a flat line. Another thing that I noticed was that I was dropping things a lot. My reflexes were shit. And again, I was not on a high doses. And my psychiatrist actually told me that normally people get on 10 milligrams of Cyberlex, and I was on 5, which is like literally the minimal amount that is recommended to feel any kind of effect at all, technically. Although this is a whole separate chapter that I could talk about how, the medical field, I think, doesn't do enough studies on how individual bodies handle medication. And there's definitely a knowledge gap when it comes to how women respond to medication, because a lot of these, tests and trials are done on men, and women have different hormones and all that, whatever. I'm not going to digress into this topic, but for me, 5 milligrams of Cyberlex was like basically incapacitating me mentally. But again, it was solving the depression, so I didn't really complain about it. And to be fair, I was also a little bit, nervous about potentially going to the psychiatrist and saying, I'd like to try other medication, especially since each of them comes with their own little set of side effects. And I was just not excited about, having to wean off of one and try another and have to deal with other potential side effects, etc., etc. But yeah, that's one of the things. I had slower reflexes in general. My mind was slower overall. So I really think that's what I was going to try. That's what I was going to say, is that I think I would not have been able to actually work during that time because my brain was in the gutter. And even normally I struggle with productivity and everything because, like I said, very bad ADHD. My mind is all over the place. It's so hard for me to focus on just one task at a time. And especially if it's like boring, repetitive, organizational tasks, which a lot of jobs imply. So I think it would have been almost impossible for me to actually do work during that time. So I was lucky to just have money to support myself, and also I was lucky to have my sister at the time who offered to pay off my mortgage on a monthly basis at least. And the rest was leaving off savings and whatever little money I was making from astrology. But anyway, digressing. And most of the time, what I did was just try to relax. I avoided watching anything stressful. I could not watch horror movies ever since I had all these bouts of anxieties and everything. I have not set foot in a theater since I had the big panic attack that I did, because I feel like it would be too re-triggering. And another wonderful side effect, or, things that have, let's say, affliction that has developed in my existence since this whole thing started in November 2022, is that I have developed some form of, I think, claustrophobia. But again, I won't get into that. Like, for instance, I don't feel comfortable going to theater halls anymore. I have gone to some shows since then. Especially the ones that I've also missed out on some opportunities, which made me very frustrated, like concerts and such, because I just got into concert halls and just got this extreme anxiety. And a few times I actually forced myself to go there and just stand through it, but I was in so much anxiety and so much pain that literally I felt, that chest tightness and everything that people feel with anxiety, that I was just not really enjoying myself. And so I just got to a point where it's better if I just avoid it, but whatever. Another parenthesis, going back to the whole Cyberlex experience, how it was. One of the more worrisome side effects, aside from not being able to focus, like I said, I was dropping things. So I broke a few glasses and dishes because I just dropped them out of my hand. And normally I had really good reflexes, but I just was too slow when I was on these pills for some reason. Anyway, and one of the more worrisome things that I experienced was that And this is something that I noticed, like, purely empirical. Like, nobody warned me about this. Nobody told me about potential side effects. But I do remember reading the prescriptions, not prescriptions, the things that, like, what is it called? Like the flyer that you get with the medication. And it has like the list of potential side effects and all this. And I remember reading through the side effects and realizing that it was interacting, like these drugs were potentially interacting with a lot of things. Like it couldn't even take like ibuprofen or something without worrying about a potential interaction. No sleeping pills. Like for instance, this psychiatrist had recommended a type of sleeping pill for me because I mentioned that I had insomnia, and the sleeping pill was interacting with the Cypralex and made me feel like crap, and I didn't even realize it. Like it made me feel really bad. Like it actually gave me intense depression, which was in a way eye-opening. By the way, the sleeping pill was called Sleep Knox or something like that. And I took half the dosage that he recommended, and it was bad. Like I remember just waking up the next day and wanting to die. Like literally it would just send me into an instant spiral of depression, which, as I was going to say, was eye-opening in with respect to how much of depression and how much of anxiety has to do with brain chemistry, because literally just taking a pill that obviously altered my brain chemistry would send me into a bout of depression, which is extremely stressful. So I stopped taking those. I figured, you know what, if I could just sleep 6 hours straight, that's fine. And, that's fine for me. Even if I have to sleep them during the day, which still happened. That was one of the disappointing things actually about Cypralex, because I was reading a lot of testimonials of people online and all this stuff, people who took ssris, many of them with anxiety and insomnia and all this stuff. And many of them were saying that, once I got on Cypralex, I was sleeping like a baby. I've never slept so well in my entire life, and that did not happen with me. Even though, and in fact, the weird thing about this was that I always felt like while the Cypralex, like while the pills were, reducing my anxiety, I felt like one part of my brain was being soothed while the other part of my brain was constantly being stimulated in a low-key level. This is the best way that I can explain it. And I'm someone who's very kind of self-aware and I guess very aware of my body, maybe also because I've developed a lot of sensitivity over the years due to various issues, especially on the emotional, mental health sphere. But anyway, I didn't feel like it was some kind of a deep peace or anything, it was more like a numbing down, but yet I still think it was, worth it because it was soothing. I definitely feel like it was soothing. It was healing on some part. It was good for me, like I said, to just have my mind stop. And it was, like, it felt like rubbing aloe vera gel over a burn or a cut, that's what it felt like. Despite all the side effects, despite all that. But I didn't even get to the most worrisome side effect, which is, I was going to say this, that I discovered it by accident because I have a stationary bike, and every now and then I get on it when I get bouts of guilt about what I ate and stuff like that, or if I just, want to exercise. And the stationary bike, of course, shows your pulse. And the thing that I noticed was I was getting on the stationary bike, and I actually, first of all, again, just as with the swimming, I was getting tired. So like, as opposed to the normal exercise that I was doing before taking any pills, where I would get pumped up and I would feel more and more energized as the workout went on. When I was on these pills, it was actually the opposite. I felt like I was just like, my heart was beating slower, like my body was getting really tired. And I really freaked out one time when I started to look at my pulse, and I realized, and in fact, it wasn't one time, I actually realized that it was happening every single time I went on a stationary bike, that my pulse, instead of going higher, was going lower, like, which was the opposite of what normally happened. And I actually read on the list of side effects that it could affect the cardiovascular system as a potential side effect. So as I said, like, all of these pills, I was just horrified by the list of side effects on them. But again, not everyone gets side effects, so Maybe I was just one of the unlucky ones. I remember one time I was on the bike and, I would watch my pulse go down. Like, it literally went down lower and lower. It started at like 190 and literally went as low as 45. And I just took my hands off the handles because I thought, if it goes down to 0, I don't want to watch this shit. You know what I mean? But it really freaked me out because, it was not normal. And also what I realized was actually, I think at the time when my pulse was going crazy, I was also taking those decongestants that I was talking about. And I remember I was actually visiting my parents and my mother took my blood pressure. And again, one day in the morning, because I was not feeling great, I was feeling low energy, very low energy in the morning. And she took my blood pressure, my pulse and all that. And again, my pulse was like 50 or something. And then I read the list of side effects that it might interact with the nose decongestant that I was taking, which was actually an allergy medication, an antihistamine, I think. And I stopped taking that, and of course my nose went very stuffy again. But after I stopped taking it, it did go a little bit better. Like, my pulse was a little bit better and all that. But again, it freaked me out. And on top of it, what pissed me off the most out of all of this was that the doctors that I was seeing, the psychiatrist, the GP, they knew my medical history. They knew what medication I was taking. I told them I was very transparent. Here, I'm taking this and this and this. My GP knew that I was taking Xanax and Cypralex, and yet she prescribed this decongestant to me, an antihistamine, without even warning me that it might have a side effect. And really, this whole experience in the grand scheme of things has really made me lose trust in the medical field to a large extent. And especially doctors, maybe not so much the medical field, but doctors, I'm way more skeptical about everything that they tell me. But again, this is a separate chapter and I'm not going to get into it. But I was actually telling this to someone, like, I think if I would have gone through this whole SSRI, Xanax saga before 2020, I don't know if I would have agreed to take the vaccine, honestly, because when I saw how casual and nonchalant they can be about, the potential side effects that you could go through, and then to gaslight you to your face that if you're experiencing side effects, it must be in your head, which, by the way, is very convenient. It's very convenient for doctors to dismiss you once you mention that you have mental health issues, to just tell you, if you are experiencing, I don't know, palpitations or all kinds of, like your pulse is going down, that's because you're stressed. It's because it's all in your head and it's psychosomatic. It's not because your body's not responding well to this bullshit medication or because you're experiencing some side effects, which I thought was incredibly disgusting, but more about that towards the end of this rant. So anyway, I was on the Cypralex and the Xanax. So like I said, I was taking the Cypralex when I was waking up. I wish I could say in the morning, but I was probably waking up most days at around noon. So I was taking the Cypralex as soon as I was waking up, and then I would take the Xanax before I went to sleep, which again was after midnight most times, but it was before going to bed because Xanax makes you sleepy. And this whole time I was taking this for 4 months. I think after about 4 months, I realized that, again, I was just getting tired and I was, well, not tired and tired. I was just tired all the time. My brain fog was annoying. I was not getting anything done. Like, even on a regular basis, even now, I feel like time flies and I don't manage to get not even 10% of what I want done in a day. But when I was on Cypralex, it was like my days were literally like blink and you miss it. Literally it felt like I blinked twice and it was like the day was over and I had to go to sleep because that's how slow I was and that's how I couldn't get my shit together at all. Like, I was just, shuffling around, moping around my apartment, maybe going on walks every now and then, getting some food, and that was pretty much it. Like, I was not, and again, I was at home for a long time. I could have done a lot of things in that free time when I was not working, but I did very little because I just felt so unproductive. So after about 4 months, I also started to be like, I need to get very serious about finding a job. And I, had applied to a couple of jobs that seemed interested. They called me for interviews and stuff. And I decided, I need to stop. I need to wean myself off of these drugs because I cannot function properly. I cannot think properly. And then on top of that, ironically, how the universe, like, with the risk of sounding even more woo-woo than usual, how the universe sends you messages, when you're very concerned with a topic. I remember right around that time, like literally when I hit about the 4-month mark of taking Cypralex, DW, which is this channel I watch on YouTube. It stands for Deutsche Welle, and it's a German channel that does all kinds of great documentaries and stuff for free, and they post them on YouTube. Highly recommended, not a sponsored video. And they posted a documentary specifically about antidepressants, the side effects of antidepressants, and cases of people who were on antidepressants for long periods of time and the struggles that they faced when they tried to wean off of them. Like some of them even to the point where they were just not able to wean off of the medication at all because they had experienced horrible side effects when they tried to get off of them. And so that was an extra kick in the butt. And I decided, that's it. I have to wean off the Cypralex. And so since I was on a low dosage, I figured I would just cut down from 5 milligrams to 2.5 for like a couple of weeks and then just stop taking it. And that's exactly what I did. There were no serious side effects with the Cypralex, except again, my nose became congested, which was incredibly annoying. I cannot say that I felt like an increase in anxiety, like specifically. I mean, especially that was especially noticeable once I went down from 5 to 2.5. But that my nose became congested. That was very annoying again. But eventually, 2 weeks I was on 2.5, then I went to 0 and I didn't feel any side effects. And so in my mind, naively, I thought, well, I'm just going to do the same thing with the Xanax. I figured, I didn't want to try both of them at the same time because I figured I want to do this as gradual as possible. And so I thought I'm going to take off the Cypralex first and then I'm going to try the Xanax. And that was when shit got real. And I think some of you who have been on benzodiazepines and have tried to wean off of them, you're probably going to be nodding in, agreement that, oh yeah, I know where this is going. So in my naive mind, again, I did all of this without consulting the psychiatrist or anything. I did mention to him, like, what if I want to wean off? He said, at some point he said, these are low doses. I would not worry about any side effects when you wean off of them. But bear in mind that I was taking Xanax for about 5 months straight, 0.5 milligrams every day. And so I decided I'm going to cut the Xanax pill in 4, and I'm going to do, first 2 weeks, I'm going to cut 25%. The next 2 weeks, I'm going to cut 25%. And basically, actually the first week, sorry, not 2 weeks. In my brain, I thought, in 1 month, I'm going to be over the Xanax, right? So the first week, I cut the 2.5 milligrams. First thing that I noticed was my anxiety definitely got higher, but I was in so much denial because, again, I had not read about the potential side effects, did not take them seriously. I just thought, again, I'm just going to be able to cut the Xanax in 4 and I'm going to wean off of it in 4 months. What I noticed, I was getting heart palpitations. All of a sudden, I started taking my blood pressure and I realized that my blood pressure all of a sudden was really above average, which was something that I had never experienced in my entire life. Like, I had always had like relatively low blood pressure. And when I was weaning off the Xanax, my blood pressure was going up when I was decreasing the doses. So after the first week, still, it was not that bad. And then I figured after the first week, I want to cut another 25% of the Xanax. And that's when I had my first very nasty reaction. And I'm talking almost had another panic attack. That was one thing. And another thing was I started experiencing something like that resembled a fever, but it was not a fever. I started getting literally full body shivers, like I was shivering from head to toe. And this would happen like literally on the night that I decided to reduce my doses, the night when I decided I'm going to cut the next 25% of the Xanax. I started having full body shivers. Like I was shivering for like 2 hours straight. I'm not kidding. And then after the 2 hours, I finally got up and I decided I give up. And I took the 25% back because I couldn't handle it. And as soon as I took the 25% back, I stopped shivering within half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour. So basically, I was clearly going through withdrawal. There's no other way to go about it. I actually took my temperature as well. I remember literally looking at the thermometer in my room that was showing like 23 degrees Celsius. And I'm a person who does not feel cold easily. And like literally I have gone swimming in 19 degrees Celsius in the Atlantic Ocean during the summer in light rain. So 23 degrees and me shivering, that was not a cold situation. I also took my temperature and I was not having a fever. So it was obviously something else. And then I started to do some research into what Xanax can do to you, what benzodiazepines can do to your brain, and how highly addictive they are. And then I started to do some research, more and more research, and I basically decided to trust the internet. Again, I didn't want to go to my psychiatrist because they were, the psychiatrist, the GP, I was really starting to lose trust in them. They did not seem particularly concerned with me or my health. They just seemed to be a bunch of pill pushers. And in fact, it only dawned on me at this time that the psychiatrist was so nonchalant about my health issues, and either nonchalant or so concerned about only making money that he had prescribed me 6 packs of Xanax when he saw me. So like I had gone to see him for my first appointment, then I went to a consultation for the second month when I told him that I was taking the 5 milligrams and I felt relatively okay. And then he said, if you're okay, that's fine. We can meet once you decide that you need a consultation. As long as you just keep taking these, you should be fine. And then he prescribed 6 packs of Xanax. Like, if I would have been someone with a serious manic depressive bipolar disorder, he could have run the risk of me offing myself with an overdose by prescribing those. But this is how little consideration he had. He was like, yeah, here, just take this, bye, vaya con Dios, have a nice life, call me when you need me, I'm here. Anyway, so where was I? Yeah, and I had that bad reaction, and afterwards, after doing research and reading multiple sources, I realized that I had cut my doses too quickly, way too quickly. And in fact, multiple sources actually said that you are not supposed to cut more than at most 10% of the doses of benzodiazepine every 2 weeks. And then, slowly, like very, very slowly adjust the doses. I don't know what happens like on a deep, psychiatric level. I have sort of read some things about it. I know it, focuses on the neurotransmitters in your brain. It's extremely addictive. And one thing that I read is that it actually stimulates the same centers of your brain as alcohol, which is why it's extremely, extremely addictive. And in fact, I remember someone commented under one of my videos about Jordan Peterson and I was shocked myself, so I agreed with this viewer, that he said in an interview that he was hospitalized. He was hospitalized for weaning off of Xanax. Like a lot of people ended up having to be hospitalized. After I did some research, I found out about that, but I was very naive about it because nobody told me about this shit, and again, like my psychiatrist just prescribed them like they were Tic Tacs, and he was like on a high dosage, very high. I think he was like on over 5 milligrams of benzodiazepine per day. So I can only imagine, and also I just can't believe that someone who was working in this field for as long as he did had no idea about how addictive Xanax was. Like he never had patients who struggled with Xanax addiction or or who had to wean themselves or didn't read any studies in psychiatry. But whatever, I digress. I'm not going to talk about Jordan Peterson. It's just shocking to me that he didn't know how addictive this shit is and ended up having to be hospitalized because he made the mistake of, probably cutting off, the whole Xanax, like literally going from 5 milligrams to 0, which he ended up having to go to a hospital. And I've actually read about this, that people ended up experiencing convulsions and stuff like it. And in fact, again, I only read the side effects of the drugs after I started taking them, basically because, again, I thought they were safe. I was a naive idiot who trusted the doctors, right? And when I read the side effects that were included in the box and said things like, if you cut too quickly, you might die, I was like, what? Like, nobody told me this shit? I also find it incredibly disturbing that this medication is prescribed often for anxiety, right? But nobody tells you that when you start to wean off of it, you get more anxiety than you even started out with. I remember, like, literally, it was the worst when I got from 0.5 to 0.25. Like, that was the worst. I'm not gonna kid. Like, there were times that every time I would decrease the doses, even with it, like, I got to the point where, I was crushing the pill and I was, like, literally making it a powder and trying to separate it into equal parts, like tiny little equal parts, and only decrease a little bit every 2 weeks. And every time I would decrease a doses, my anxiety would go up. I would become more emotional. I would feel this literal physical discomfort, which, again, just like a drug addict, when they wean off of cocaine or something, they are in pain. They experience body shivers. Absolutely no doubt in my mind that was withdrawal, okay? Even when with very, very small changes in the doses. And I swear to God, there were nights where I cried myself to sleep because I was in pain. Like, literally, I was in pain. It was like every time I would decrease my doses, my anxiety would go up. I would get heart palpitations, and also something that I noticed was that I was starting to take my blood pressure, and literally I was taking my blood pressure daily because I started to have concerns about, high blood pressure. And also I read that anxiety itself increases your blood pressure. So as a precaution, I was tracking my blood pressure. I got, a device, and also because at one checkup, the doctor, I did a checkup that I had to do for the employer. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but here where you get a job, they send you to this checkup to tell you, so that the medical clinic can tell the employer that you're fit to work, basically. And they took my blood pressure and it was really high. It was like 140 over 100 or something, which really horrified me because I had never had high blood pressure. I always had really low blood pressure my whole life. Like, normally when I would get up in the morning, it was like 110. At best, it was like 110 over 80, right? Sometimes it was even like 100. Sometimes I even had a blood pressure that was like 90 over 70 or something, So my whole life, even in recent years, I had always had like low blood pressure. And all of a sudden, and actually this is really important to note, because at the time when I went to get this checkup, it was actually in those first 2 weeks when I had cut the first 25% of Xanax out of my diet, out of my daily doses. So I went to get this checkup, my blood pressure was off the charts, and I started to freak out. I got a machine, so I started to track my blood pressure. And what I noticed was, this is what I was getting at, was that literally every time I was decreasing my Xanax doses, my blood pressure would go up by about 10 units, and it would stay that way for about 3 days, even when I wasn't drinking any coffee. Because, again, to manage my anxiety, once I finally got a job, especially since I was required to go to the office and deal with corporate bullshit, I decided to stop drinking coffee, even though it was extremely painful for me to cut it out, altogether from my diet. So even with the cutting out of the coffee, my blood pressure was just going crazy a little bit, So anyway, this was like the full list of, side effects. With Xanax basically took me in total about 1 year, I think. Let me think, actually. Yeah, it was almost 1 year. 1 year to completely wean off of it. Like, and after I got burned multiple times and I had full body shivers and pain and anxiety and, again, moments where I felt like, again, I was getting pretty close to having another panic attack or something, I decided not to risk anymore. And I was cutting down very, very, very slow amounts. Like every couple of weeks I was cutting up like, I remember at one point I was calculating 7% of the doses. Every 2 weeks I was recalculating 7% of the doses. So I would, basically be calculating little breadcrumbs of, little crumbs of Xanax and deciding how many I'm going to take today. Anyway, what I realized, and also when I went to see another psychiatrist, I went to check another psychiatrist because, first of all, I wanted to get my Xanax doses because it was running low, even though the guy gave me like 6 months worth of Xanax. I was running low on supply by the end of the whole experiment, and I had to get new Xanax. And then I figured I want to see a different psychiatrist because the first guy, did not seem that interested in my well-being. So I thought I might as well just get a second opinion. So I go to this other guy who basically gaslit the shit out of me. Basically, I told him about my whole saga about having withdrawal symptoms when I started to wean off of the Xanax. I told him about the congestion issues that I experienced with Cypralex. And when it came to the Cypralex, he was like, okay, so I guess it wasn't really, it sounds like it wasn't working that well for you. But when it came to the Xanax, he started gaslighting me. He started saying things like, oh, there's no way that you experience those side effects just because of the Xanax. It's probably just your anxiety, you getting yourself worked up about it. And that's what caused you to have, higher anxiety and to have the shivers and the heart palpitations. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me, asshole? Maybe the heart palpitations made some sense. Yes, if you have anxiety, they would go up, but the full body shivers, there's no way in hell that had to do with like me working myself into a state. And in fact, the thing that freaked me out about the first situation like that was that I was actually in a really peaceful state. And then it started out of nowhere. I had decreased my doses and I went to bed. And then literally within, I don't know, like I couldn't fall asleep. And like within 15 minutes, I started shivering from head to toe, which freaked me the fuck out. And I kept shivering and shivering. And I stubbornly just stayed there and tolerated it because I thought, okay, this is probably just, the Xanax leaving my system, but I have to push through it. I have to push through it because I want to get off of it. I'm not going to, drag this on for a long time. And eventually it just got to a point where it was so bad, and I also started getting really intense heart palpitations. And so I finally got up and I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna take back the dosage that I was normally taking. And then it stopped. Literally it stopped like within, within 20 minutes tops. It finally stopped when I took the pill and I was able to fall asleep. But the fact that he was gaslighting me, and then he tried to keep pushing other pills, trying to convince me that I have an anxiety disorder, which again, I'm not disputing that. Maybe I do have an anxiety disorder, but having had a bad experience, having had the side effects and all that with the Cypralex, I was not excited about trying some different medication. And I also started to basically feel a little bit better, like slowly but surely I felt a little bit better. And he convinced me to try another drug called Tritico, and I tried literally again. He told me to start by taking 1/3 of the doses. I took 1/3 of the doses, felt like absolute shit. He told me that I would not have any side effects, that it would not, that I would wake up and feel fresh. I woke up and it literally took me like half an hour to remember what year I'm in and what my name is. And then he also freaked me out by telling me that you should, when you wake up, don't just don't just jump out of bed, he said. Just stay there, sit by the side of your bed for a while, because this drug might mess up your blood pressure and you might experience bad side effects, like even faint or something if you are rushing out of bed too quickly. And I was like, you know what? Never mind. I took like one or two. I think only one. I don't think I took it the second time because I felt so crappy afterwards. I just told, never mind, dude. This is not working out, whatever. I just continued to take the Xanax until I finally completely weaned off of it. And that was it. That was the end of the SSRI and benzodiazepine saga. Sorry. Although at my age, maybe it's saga. And I have basically stopped taking Xanax in November or December or late November 2023. Ever since then, I have taken it 2 or 3 times, actually in recent months. I think in the past 1 or 2 months, I've only taken no more than 0.25 milligrams, and I've taken it sporadically when I went to the dentist because again, like I explained, I started having weird anxieties in weird places, and I think to a large extent when it came to the dentist, because again, I was seeing the same dentist for 16 fucking years, and I just recently changed her because she botched one of my root canals, and I went through a huge amount of pain in the past month, but don't even get me started on that, which I think also contributed to me developing an anxiety every time I went to see her. But on top of that, she has this really crammed office. I don't know, is that what you call it? The dental space where she puts you in the chair and all this. And in recent history, like I think in the past 6 months or so, every time I went there, I started getting really bad anxiety when I was going there. Like it was making me extremely uncomfortable. I was getting the chest pain and all this shit. And the last few times that I went, I decided, you know what, I'm fuck this. I'm going to take a little bit of Xanax, before I go. Why should I suffer? Life is too short. And even with the Xanax, I still had anxiety and a little bit of palpitations, but at least it was sort of manageable. I still ended up having to change her because she was driving me crazy. And like I said, I think she botched one of my root canals. But anyway, only time will tell, as my new dentist has said. Because if it's an infection, it will show after like a year. Yay. So much fun. Anyway, the bottom line is I still have anxiety, and this is the point where I'm finally actually getting to the main course of the video, the meat of the video, which is my opinions about the whole mental health saga, the whole mental health field, the approaches towards the mental health field, the prejudices towards people who have mental health issues, for lack of a better term. This is what I'm going to get into the really important parts, I think. But as I have said, I wanted to go through some of my experiences. This is just, even though I've been talking for over 2 hours about my personal experiences, this is just me skimming the surface, okay? Just, kind of pinpointing some important things that have happened in recent history so that you could get an impression, an idea, and in my childhood, not just recent history, things that happened that would lead to the issues that I've had to deal with, and not just when it comes to mental health, but like I explained, even with my my digestive system and other issues, like the fact now, by the way, I take blood pressure medication, and I actually have to get scheduled for the cardiologist because I still am not, I went to get an EKG and everything seems fine with my heart. So the funny thing is now that, I've gotten, the last time I went to see a cardiologist, I got a runaround, and he basically said, because I thought it was my duty to mention that I was on SSRIs at some point and that I got a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder, and he gave me the runaround. He said, well, if you have an anxiety disorder, that could definitely explain your blood pressure going up and down, and you should first see a psychiatrist and get on medication. And I was like, no thanks, brah. I've been there, done that. And yeah, I know that there are different drugs, okay? I'm not totally excluding it. I'm not totally excluding it. So actually, as a conclusion, as a final conclusion about the whole medication topic, I do not regret taking them. If anything, I think I should have tried them sooner, honestly, because despite the side effects, despite the pain, despite the withdrawal bullshit with the benzodiazepines, the final balance is that the invasive thoughts were gone. A lot of the invasive thoughts. Okay, I no longer have a merry-go-round of nightmares running through my brain on a regular basis. I still sometimes get angry. I still sometimes have, anxiety, of course, and I still sometimes have bad memories and sad times and all that. But I really feel like the bulk of it, like the really painful shit, to a large extent was neutralized. Now, I don't know if it was just the medication. Maybe all the medication did was just, like I said, allow me a break from my mind. Literally, that's what it felt like. I was taking a vacation from my mind torturing me with a merry-go-round of negative thoughts and negative memories and all the negative emotions that were being dragged with that, So if for no other reason, I think it was worth it. I do feel like it was a very soothing experience for my brain, literally for my brain. It did rewire something, okay? But I still don't think that being on medication long term, I don't want to be on medication forever because, like I explained with Cipralex, and I'm sure that any other medication, it's the same shit in the sense that they all have a long list of side effects. You have to be careful for the rest of your life with what other pills you are taking. And also on the topic of this, because I mentioned that the second psychiatrist I saw basically gaslit me. And in the meantime, I actually took several DNA tests, and with the DNA tests that I took them on two separate websites. I'm not going to say which ones, but I also took these additional tests that basically show you, genetic predispositions and all kinds of things like vulnerabilities, stuff like this. And one thing that it showed, lo and behold, which I intuitively actually had this thought, when the psychiatrist gaslit me, he told me that there's no way that I could have had these bad reactions from the Xanax. My first thought was, when I came across that piece of information that said that Xanax impacts the same parts of the brain as alcohol, my first thought was, well, maybe I have a genetic weakness because I have cases of alcoholism in my family, and maybe that's why my body overreacts to even small fluctuations of Xanax, of benzodiazepines, because that's what the substance is. And lo and behold, when I took the genetic testing, it showed that I have some kind of genetic weakness, a propensity for alcoholism. Now, I'm not saying that this is undeniable, undisputable proof that my take was healthy, but it was just a gentle reminder that I am smart enough to put things together. And a lot of the times when it comes to your own body, I'm telling this to anyone willing to listen, not just when it comes to myself. Don't allow doctors to gaslight you. When it comes to your body, you're the person who knows best. You may not be the one who has the medical science knowledge and all this stuff, but you are the first responder of your body. You are aware of what's happening in your body, and don't allow someone to tell you that you're not feeling what you're feeling. You know what I mean? And to me, this was pretty solid evidence to suggest that my take probably was correct, that I have some kind of vulnerability, and that's why I was having really bad reactions. And he was hitting me with bullshit arguments like, there's no way that you've had these reactions because I have patients who are taking 2, 3, 5 milligrams of Xanax and they've never had any bad reactions. And I didn't tell him this up front because I didn't want to get into a conflict or anything. But number one, the fact that they're taking 2, 3 milligrams of Xanax doesn't mean shit. The problem is when they're going to try to get off of those 2, 3 milligrams. So if they were just taking them, but they never tried to get off of them, that does not prove anything. Second of all, every individual is different. So even if there are people out there who can take Xanax like Tic Tacs and not have to worry about any massive side effects when they wean off of them, does not mean that everyone is going to react the same way. And you, as a doctor, have to be responsible and inform the patient that, hey, maybe, these are the potential side effects you could experience. Maybe try to watch out for them. Maybe try not to be too comfortable with taking these pills for long term. And by the way, ever since I went to see a psychiatrist, I've come across multiple articles that said benzodiazepines like Xanax are not recommended for long-term use. And the psychiatrist should basically tell you not to be on this shit for more than a month, tops. And then later get weaned on to other medications that don't have massive side effects when you get off of them. But neither of the two psychiatrists that I went to told me this. Neither of them thought to warn me, hey, don't take this shit for like 4 months straight. And they knew that I was taking it. The first one that I saw, he knew I was taking it daily because I told him. He did not think, not only did he not tell me not to take it, but he prescribed 6 packs of it. He was like, here, bitch, have enough to see you at Christmas, Anyway, this was the saga anyway. So getting back to the meat, because again, you see, this is how my brain, I'm glad, honestly, I'm glad that I'm back to my usual ADHD brain that is all over the place. Because, this is where the magic happens. Even though my mind spins around in multiple directions and dimensions at the same time and then keeps going back to other thoughts, this is where the creation happens. This is how I put things together, okay? And I missed it when I was on Cypralex, and I was just like, a brain dead zombie to a large extent. But again, I was a brain dead zombie that was healing, okay? I was healing, I was resting. But the final thoughts that I have about the mental health topic in general is that everything is about life experience. I've also said this in other videos, the ones where I talked about the age of Aquarius and the age of loneliness and all this stuff. What is happening in the world right now is that people are systematically ignoring everyone, including people in the medical field, especially the pill pushers, who give you 6 packs of Xanax so that, they don't have to see you for at least 4 months. These people, they ignore humans' basic biological needs. They ignore the fact that, and I'm not even getting into things like traumas, okay? That's definitely a factor, but aside from traumas, there is the aspect of we are social animals. We need to live in a tribe. And I'm speaking from this perspective as someone who has consciously chosen to isolate myself, and I'm still pretty much living, quite isolated. I make a little bit more effort, to take myself out for walks every now and then and be less of a hikikomori, you know what I mean? Like, be completely shut off for days on end and all that. But I'm still basically I don't have a healthy social life. I don't have a tribe. It's not even about having a social life, honestly, because this is one of the reasons why I don't even try to socialize, because I'm not interested in fake bullshit, I'm interested in genuine connections. I'm interested in people that I can trust. I'm interested in people that have similar values. People that make me feel safe and accepted. I'm not interested in just, again, I don't know, hanging out with someone who is interested in posting pictures on Instagram, or all kinds of stuff that I personally don't care about, that does not enrich my existence in any way. And this is the problem. It is a systemic problem, honestly, in today's world, because of not only, but also in part because of multiculturalism, because it's way more difficult to find people that are equally, they're coming from a similar background, a similar value system, but again, that's a whole different can of worms that I'm not even going to get into. But I do think that multiculturalism is adding to mental illness in the grand scheme of things, because the most fundamental idea is that one of the basic needs that people have is the need for belonging. And the more mixed the population is, the lower the chances are that you have a sense of belonging. Because a sense of belonging comes from identity, cultural identity, having people with a similar set of values, the same faith, the same habits, the same traditions, the same history. Same history is very important. This is why I, coming from, Eastern Europe and a background of generational trauma deeply rooted in communism, how could I possibly relate to someone who has no idea the level of mental illness, insanity, and abuse that happened during communism, and on top of that, maybe is even naive enough to encourage it? How could I relate? What background do I have in common with this person? Just to give you an example. And especially for people who are not religious, it's very difficult. If you're religious, at least you go to church or whatever, temple, mosque, whatever it is, and you find people that at least have the same religion, the same faith, and you talk religion, at least you have a common denominator. But if you're not religious, you're screwed. This is why so many people end up in cults nowadays, because they're so starved. They need that. They want to belong to a tribe. And these cults, they feed off of that. They feed off of this basic biological need by selling them the idea that, join us and you will be part of a family. To a large extent, corporations do the same shit. How often have you heard this theory of we are a family here? We are family here at insert random corporate hell.com. Yeah, they feed off of the same thing, but at the same time, in the medical field, it's like they gaslight people, it sounds like you have an anxiety disorder. So it's not the fact that you don't have any healthy connections, that you live in a bullshit dystopian universe, that you live under threat of war, that you've lost your job multiple times in the past years, that you have gone through God knows how many cases of narcissistic abuse. It's not all of that. It's the fact that you have an anxiety disorder. And we can fix it by giving you benzodiazepines and all kinds of ssris. And then something that pisses me off is when people sit on their high horses and they judge people with quote unquote mental health issues, which has happened to me as well. Especially having experienced it. And again, I didn't have a large social life, an active social life. And I only have a handful of people who even know me remotely. And even the few people that I told about my issues, I felt like I was looked at like I had leprosy. Like somehow mental illness is contagious. I felt like, I swear to God, I think mental illness is like the new AIDS. It's like, if you say that you're on ssris or you've had panic attacks or insomnia or any kind of mental issue, people look at, stay away from me, which is exactly what further deepens a person into mental illness. Because the reason people become depressed, anxious, have insomnia and all this shit is because they don't have any support. They feel unsafe chronically. On top of that, they deal with economic insecurity, narcissistic abuse. They don't have a single person that they feel they can trust and have a conversation with unless they're paying by the hour, and that's if they can afford to pay by the hour, meaning seeing a therapist. And sometimes not even these therapists are not useful, because the reason I stopped seeing my last psychotherapist was because she started telling me that I need to forgive, people who have abused me horribly. Which is another form of gaslighting. It's like, you go to therapy to get sympathy for being gaslit, only to be met with more gaslighting. What sense does that make to you, to anyone? And this is it. This is the mental health crisis. And another thing that I have a problem with is the very term mental health crisis, because it's not a mind thing. It's not the mind that goes crazy. I mean, in some situations, it might actually be the mind, in the sense that, again, like with me, I started having invasive thoughts. Yeah, my mind was kind of fucked at that point. Then if you are talking about very serious psychiatric disorders like, schizophrenia, stuff like that, there could actually be things that are, messed up in the brain, where they're seeing things, they're hearing things and all that. And so to some extent, it can also be something that is mechanically wrong with your brain. But even in those situations, there is the question of, did it actually originate in the brain or did it originate from traumas? And I think most likely it's the second explanation. And that's exactly what Daniel Mackler said as well. Because he said in every single case of every single case that he dealt with where people had psychiatric disorder, very serious psychiatric disorders, there was always a history of abuse. Very often early childhood and cases of inexplicable abuse that the person in question just couldn't handle. And so their mind just went haywire. Their circuits got fried. And the bottom line is, like, for instance, with me, even when I was going through the worst anxiety and panic in my life, my mind was fine. My mind was like sitting there, you know, kind of like an external observer looking at myself being like, this bitch is tripping right now, you know, like, and yet I was conscious that my mind was, you know, that I was conscious of the fact that I shouldn't be feeling the way that I was feeling. Like when I was sitting in a theater at a concert, I remember trying to reason my way out of the way that I was feeling. Like, why is my heart beating faster? Why do I suddenly get this urge to just burst out the door and, you know, look for the exit? I would try to reason it. I would try to tell myself that I'm safe. It's fine. I'm okay. And I would still feel like shit. You know, I would do the breathing exercises and the going to my happy spot and all this stuff. That is not coming from the mind. It's coming from your animal side. It's coming from your biological subconscious programming that has been either repeatedly traumatized, that has recorded, repeatedly has recorded the message that you don't have any social support, and now it has become hyper vigilant to the point where everything is a threat. And so it's, you know, firing at all cylinders, like all of a sudden, things that normally you wouldn't consider a threat. Now, all of a sudden, your brain is, you know, pushing you to be very attentive to all kinds of changes in your environment or people's moods or all kinds of things that now make you overreact in a way. That could be one explanation based on the things that I have felt. And basically, it's your instincts. That's what's happening. This is why people are going insane. This is why mental illness is rampant, because so many people are not getting their basic biological needs met. Not from society, not from other people, not at all. Basically, if you are lucky to be born into a relatively sane family, count your blessings, because a lot of us did not have that luck. And the truth is, and this is backed up by science, it's not just my personal opinion, listen to what Gabor Mate says. The foundation of a person's personality is built in the first 3 to 7 years of life. So if you were unlucky to be exposed to things you shouldn't have been exposed to, or grew up in a war zone, or, I don't know, had to deal with threats to your safety, your brain is already wired differently than a person who has been raised in a stable, sane environment where they got their needs met. When it comes to me, for instance, I had signs very early on. I showed signs, and I know this now as an adult, you know, based on the few memories I have left, that I showed signs very early on that I was not well. And the people around me, my parents, completely ignored everything that was going on. For instance, I know that my mother told me she went back to work when I was 9 months old and I didn't have grandparents. And so I was left to, I remember one time I asked my mother, who actually took care of me after you went to work? And she said, I don't remember. And I said, what do you mean you don't remember? Like, I'm not even that maternal, but I think if I went to work and I left my kid with someone, even if it happened like 20, 30 years ago, I think I would remember who took care of my kid while I was not there. Anyway, I'm digressing. I had like several nannies by the time I was 6 years old. And then when I started school, I was alone. A lot of the time I was alone when I came home from school. And to a large extent, it was also because I did not want anyone. I told my parents, I don't want any more nannies. I don't want anyone controlling me. But in retrospect, it was because I was already traumatized. By the time I was 6, 7 years old, I was fed up with the human race. And I wanted to be alone because I didn't trust anyone. And, you know, I also wanted the freedom. I wanted the freedom to do my own thing. And I realized that the adults around me were trying to control me, did not listen to me, didn't care about what made me happy or sad. And so I was like, screw everyone. But one incident that I remember that clearly showed I was not well. And I mean, by not well, I don't mean like I was batshit crazy, because I kept it together on the surface, but I was not emotionally healthy, all right, as a child. And one incident was, I remember when I was a kid, I had this thing about being absolutely terrified to be alone, which is ironic, because now I live alone and I've been alone for a very long time. But when I was a kid, I couldn't handle it. Like, I was terrified. And I remember with the nanny that my mother paid when I was, who was actually they were an elderly couple living in our apartment building when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And I remember that my mother instructed the woman to make sure that she was at home in our apartment before I woke up, because I was terrified of being alone in the home. I would literally start to freak out. And one time I woke up early and she wasn't there because she had stayed downstairs to talk to a different neighbor or something. She got caught up talking to a neighbor, forgot about me or something. And I freaked out. I literally freaked out. I started getting really emotional, went into a panic, and I took out the schnitzel hammer from the kitchen and started to try to break down the front door. This was when I was 5 years old, by the way. And now I laugh about it, but it's not funny. Literally she came home and found me, under the covers with the schnitzel hammer, trembling and crying. And they had to change the door afterwards because there were splinters coming out of the front part. But this was an example of a child that was not happy, that was not well. And I probably had separation anxiety. I probably had all kinds of anxieties. I know that I had this thing where I didn't want to sleep alone. I think I wanted to sleep with my mother in the same bed until I was like 10 years old or something. And they kept pushing me. They tried to wean me off of it. So eventually I was sleeping alone, I think, by the time I was like 9 or 10 years old. And I remember even back then, and this was in the 90s, I could not fall asleep early. And even when I did go to bed, I had a Walkman. So those of you who are older, you remember Walkmans. They were portable players, portable cassette players. And I remember being 9, 10 years old, I could not fall asleep already. I could only fall asleep if I was playing music in my headphones as I was falling asleep. I would have the same cassettes that I would play over and over again. It was Enigma and Era. It was the same bands over and over again. But whatever, digressing again. The bottom line is that my so-called quote-unquote mental illnesses, mood disorders, and so on, they can all be explained by my background, okay? And none of them were just like, oh, I was born with a fucked up gene, or I was just born anxious and depressed. And don't get me wrong, maybe there's also a genetic component. Yes, I do have, like, my maternal grandmother also had some issues with depression for most of her life. But then again, she also did not have a great life either. So, like I said, it's difficult to separate the nature from the nurture in these situations. And I've only heard of like one case. I remember when I was a kid, I saw a documentary on HBO, which is now called Max, about this one kid who had been diagnosed with severe depression already when he was like 8, 9 years old, and eventually offed himself when he was in his teens. I think he was like 15, 16. And that was truly a case that you could have said, at least from the surface, based on the information they were given, you could have said maybe it was purely genetic. He had also had an uncle who had off himself and also had a history of depression. But even in that situation, I wish that I would have been a fly on the wall to see what was going on in his home environment, how healthy it was, to which extent he got his needs met, how much pain he went through. Also, another factor that I would take into account that I started to get into is generational trauma. And I started to get into it way before Teal Swan started to market it as her own personal theory, actually, because she annoys me with the fact that, she's taking these like kind of pop takes of psychology where she takes little, people's studies and puts her own like twist on them and whatever. Like I said, I don't hate her entirely because a lot of the things that she says I think are very useful, but every now and then she's obviously just trying to sell, shit. But anyway, before Teal Swan started to talk about generational trauma, I had started to read, because I didn't finish it because F my ADHD, but I started to read this book called It Didn't Start With You by Jack Wallen, I think it's called. Whatever, the book is called It Didn't Start With You, and it speaks about transgenerational traumas. And this is not just talking about it from the perspective of nurture, meaning, how bad behaviors and bad parenting is passed down from one generation to another. It's also talking about literally genetic impact of your parents' and grandparents' traumas. And they back it up with evidence, based on studies that were done on rats and what conditioning. The book is really interesting, so I do recommend. And for instance, I realized that when the guy explains in this book that, sometime, I know it sounds far-fetched, but basically he speaks of several examples, for instance, where a child will suddenly develop nightmares, or will suddenly develop maybe some kind of psychosomatic illness or psychiatric disorder at the same age when something happened to an ancestor. He was talking about, as far as he could tell, it goes maybe 2 generations back. They don't know if it goes further than that. But for instance, I was actually thinking about this because when I when I had my worst attacks, and this was in 2022, that was actually the year when that was the age, sorry, not the year, that was the same age, 33, when my father was deployed to a war zone. And I had started having nightmares that were very weird, even though I was not watching horror films or anything like that. I kept having these recurring nightmares that I was on a battlefield and I had to save people. And he was not in a front, he was not in a front line, but he was in a war zone. Okay. He was literally behind enemy lines and, whatever. He was involved in training soldiers and selling weapons, basically. So he was in a line of battle to some extent. And I can only imagine it must have been a time of extreme anxiety, even though in his typical, macho mentality, he probably just acted like everything was fine. But literally I kept having these recurring nightmares of I was on a battlefield and I had to save myself. And it was and I had this mentality of I have to stay awake until the dawn. I have to sit and watch, to be the night watch until the dawn. And literally as soon as I would see the light come up, it's I would finally relax and finally be able to sleep a little bit, but still would not be able to sleep 6 hours straight until I started getting medication. Anyway, let me not digress. Okay, there might be some truth to it. Either way, it's an interesting read. But the point is, what I'm trying to say is, I am annoyed by people who have this holier than thou mentality of people who have mental illness, it's because they're weak. It's because, I don't know, they can't handle the crises of life. I think I've handled the crises of life considerably well. Considering all the shit that I went through, I think I've handled things very well. Considering that I still managed to get 2 college degrees and still have a job, praise the Lord Jesus, thank you Jesus. Even though I've been unemployed for a significant amount of time in the previous 3 years or so, you may have heard that the, IT field is going to shit in general. But again, let me not complain about my work. But the bottom line is, I have never, just like Daniel Mackler, honest to God, I personally have never come across a person who has had a diagnostic of depression, anxiety, any kind of mood disorder that does not have a background of trauma. I've never heard of it, honest to God. I don't know. Again, there might be cases where it happens. And again, even in the cases where it does happen, the question is how much of it comes from, transgenerational trauma, which is also something that can be controlled and avoided for future generations, right? The less traumatized the parents are, the more likely that the children are going to be healthy or healthier and have less of a predisposition towards mental health issues. And also, again, referencing my personal experience, for instance, with the loneliness topic, I don't think that I realized how much of my need for socializing and my need for belonging, at least on a very subconscious, primitive level, was met by the fact that I was going to work in the office, where even in the worst work environments that I had, I still had like one or two people that I could, exchange a few words with or have an inside joke with, and people that I felt were quite okay and quite nice and all this stuff. And once I went into lockdown, it was like I got completely cut off from the world. I was like, Will Smith in I Am Legend. Not only did I not go to the office, but also I would look outside the window and it looked like my whole neighborhood was deserted, because so much of my neighborhood was rental properties and students. I live not far from universities and dorms, so a lot of students live in the neighborhood, and also a lot of people who were living here to work had left in 2020 to go back to their own hometowns, because why should they pay rent if the jobs that they had allowed them to work remotely? So it was a huge level of isolation. I mean, and I think, again, it's like the primitive side of your brain doesn't care for logic, doesn't care for reason, the instinctive side of your brain. Like, even if I could be, from a rational perspective, I could tell my brain, well, you're not alone, because in case of an emergency, well, you have these people to call, or you have a police station, or the hospital is not too far away. But the primitive side of your brain doesn't give a shit. The primitive side of your brain is like, what the fuck is a police station? The only thing that it registers is that you haven't seen another person in person in months, which again registers as, a high alert scenario, which really ramps up your anxiety and again pushes you over the edge of being hypersensitive to every little thing in your environment and becoming hypersensitive to noise and stuff like that. That's another thing that happened before I started taking pills, was that I got to a point where literally a couple of times I could have sworn that I heard my phone buzzing, like vibrating next to me, but then I realized that the phone was in a different room. Like, I think I got pretty close to just having some kind of psychotic break or something, where I was like, my brain was just fried because of the high levels of stress. I was just like super, super stressed. Like, my nerves were inflamed and hypersensitive, and on top of that, was stuck in my own head with negative thoughts and memories and all that stuff. So that's what happened. Now I'm okay-ish. And I try to, respect my boundaries more, and like I said, take myself out for walks to feel the sun. Like, at least try to have some basic human interactions just to see people. I don't know, to have a in-person conversation, even if it's just shopping or something. I know to some people this is going to sound very sad or whatever, but it is what it is. You have to do what you can with what you have available. I've also considered going back to therapy at some point, but I'm not in the best financial situation, so I don't know about that. Maybe at some point. And also, I would have to find someone who is good, which is the whole other chapter, a whole different problem, to find someone who's trustworthy and someone who can actually help you. Because I've also known people who just spend money on therapy and it doesn't really seem to do anything, really doesn't seem to make much of a difference, because based on some of the stories that I've heard from, acquaintances who are seeing psychiatrists, therapists, and so on, a lot of them just sounded like they were telling the patients what they wanted to hear instead of actually working through their issues. And we're taxing them a shit ton of money for this. Pretty much. I think I have exhausted, finally. I don't, like I said, I really hope that I'm going to manage to load this video all at once. If not, I'm going to have to break it down, and I'm going to have to turn it into a series, a podcast series of, and people who are going to watch this, and I'm pretty sure I can get the reactions when people are going to see this, that I've loaded something that's like 3 hours long. They're going to be like, oh my God, what the hell is this? And she recorded her memoirs. Anyway, this is my long ass complaint about the mental health situation, and also, like I said, I have lost a lot of trust. And that being said, I think I have implied it, maybe even if I didn't say it directly. I'm not against medication, and in fact, to some extent, it does give me like an extra blanket of security to know that in case of emergency, I could go back to trying a different kind of medication. But I'd rather not, you know. However, if you get to a point where you are severely stressed, tired, you're again suffering with serious problems like I did. I think my problems were pretty serious, or they got pretty serious because I had systematically ignored issues for years. You shouldn't be shying away from using medication if it helps, at least in the initial stages, you know, and then work on a deeper healing as well. Aside from that, I also want to take a little bit of time to talk about people and why I isolate. I think I did touch upon it a little bit, but let me just tell you that if you were traumatized, this is a whole separate chapter. If you were traumatized, there's no way for you to ignore the fact that you were traumatized. Let me just start by saying that, because what I feel is happening in the world today is kind of like, if you're someone, especially if you're talking about childhood traumas, like significant childhood traumas that have basically shaped the person you are, there's no way that you can just cut that out of your brain and your personality and just, you know, cut it out in a clear-cut way and put it in a box and throw it away and never think about it. Because your traumas are an intrinsic part of who you are. Your traumas are part of a net, a web of characteristics that have developed. You know, it's like your whole personality has included the trauma as part of it. It has countless ramifications. It is part of the whole system that makes up who you are and your personality and your desires and your needs. So what I feel is happening in the world right now is like, you as a traumatized person, you're not allowed to talk about it. I mean, technically, yeah, you're allowed to talk about it, but people treat you like a freak. If you actually talk about it, you're treated like a freak, you're treated like a pussy, you're treated like a problem. Like, you know, people don't want to talk to you. They use the fact that you were traumatized against you because the world is extremely narcissistic, which further deepens you down into trauma and mental health, because the only way to really heal is to be around people who acknowledge what happened to you. And then, I'm not trying to say that they should tolerate shit from you, but they have to try to acknowledge where you're coming from and not gaslight you and try to talk to you as if this never happened. Which is, I think, what is really happening in the world today. And people who are severely traumatized are expected to behave like they had a perfect childhood, like everything was fine, like they're happy. And it's also because the world is so family-centric. You know, Daniel Mackler also talked about this, you know, to a large extent, which is really disgusting, because it means that, again, if you're not lucky enough to be born in the perfectly healthy environment, the encouraging environment that you deserve, that, you know, honored your qualities and individuality and was willing to meet your needs, then you're pretty much screwed for life, right? Because you're never going to come across the level of support and understanding that you need to move on in life. And another thing is, now there's this talk about victim mentality. I swear to God, nothing pisses me off. It's like, I remember one time I tried to talk to this person about different things that happened in my childhood, and she sent me a book about moving away from victim mentalities. And I felt genuinely very offended by that. Extremely offended, because I am not someone who has a victim mentality. So a victim mentality is basically someone who's like given up on life, you know, someone who's like, oh, well, this happened to me in 2015 or whatever, and now I can't function anymore, or I don't see the point of moving on, or they just constantly blame everything that is wrong with their life based on one or two traumas that have happened. That is not what you are doing. That is not what I am doing by talking about it. Talking about it is to try to get people to understand where I'm coming from. Because traumas, just like a physical accident, for instance, like, let me just give you an analogy, right? If you see someone if you know of someone, for instance, who was hit by a car and is now in a wheelchair because they were hit by a car, you wouldn't go to that person and be like, oh, just move on. You know, you wouldn't be like, you know what you need to do right now? Forgive. That's what you need to do. Nobody in their right mind would say that, right? Nobody in their right nowadays, because a lot of people are not in their right mind, they might actually say it. But generally, most people with common sense, they would not say it, because at the very least, they would think, I don't know, I'm not in a position to tell this person what to do because this has never happened to me. And yet, something like this, they realize when someone is in a wheelchair, there is no way for this person to not wake up every day of their lives and see the consequences and feel the consequences of that trauma, of that physical trauma in this case. And when you are emotionally traumatized or psychologically traumatized, it's basically the same shit. The only difference is nobody's seeing the wheelchair. And yet, when you are severely emotionally traumatized and you have CPTSD, PTSD, whatever the fuck it is, anxiety, insomnia, depression, people have no qualms about telling you that you need to move on, you need to forgive. They tell you all this like bullshit kumbaya shit that really all it does is further you down the hole, shove you down the hole of isolation and making you feel gaslit and making you feel like nobody understands you. And, you know, basically, it's kind of like looking at a person in a wheelchair and pretending like, you know what, I'm just going to pretend like this person is not in a wheelchair. I'm just going to talk to them as if they're a regular person. So if I see them struggling to, I don't know, reach the top shelf of something, I'm just going to sit there and watch them struggle instead of offering to help. It's literally this stupid. If you know that someone has been severely traumatized, you know, for instance, you cannot ignore that. You cannot act like that didn't happen or you don't know it, you know, because of course that affected them. But that doesn't mean, on the other hand, you have to handle them with gloves or like dehumanize them or treat them like victims. But by the same token, it's not something that can be ignored. You know, it's not something that the person can just pretend never happened. And, you know, especially if you're dealing with, like I said, childhood traumas that have to deal with severe trust issues and all this stuff, you can't just expect, you know, for instance, someone who was abandoned by their father to not have abandonment issues. And, you know, and what I feel like we live in the kind of society where that's exactly what's happening. People are being blamed for shit that is just a natural, normal reaction to stuff that has happened in their lives. Or again, you know, all kinds of traumas, doesn't even matter. Or someone, again, who has dealt with alcoholism and in the family, or substance abuse or any kind of instability, and now has become a control freak, which is a typical reaction to that kind of an environment, right? They don't like surprises. They're uptight. They're serious. They're extremely professional. They cannot loosen up. They don't like to have fun. They don't know how to have fun. They can't live in the moment because for them, life has been all about stress, and that's how their brain is wired. And you can't just pretend like, again, this person has had the perfect, you know, it's like trying to react to interact with the person and pretending that they had a different upbringing than they actually had. And on top of that, we live in a world where there's so much stigma. There's so much stigma connected to mental illness, like I said, as if it's some kind of a contagious disease. When in reality, it's just a person's normal response to their environment. Most of the times, 99% of the times. If, again, let me give you another analogy. If a person grows up in horrible filth, right? They don't have a house. They have to sleep in a hole in the ground. They're eating leaves. They're not washing what they're eating. You would not be surprised if this person is full of parasites, diseased, you know, maybe sick. They're, I don't know, they have a snotty nose and all. You would not be surprised because you would look at the environment they're living in. You would think, of course they are the way that they are. But when a person grows up not getting their emotional needs met, you know, they grew up feeling unsafe, unloved, like they had to constantly defend themselves against everyone and anything in their environment. And you look at this person and they're defensive, you blame them for being defensive, especially if they're women, because heaven forbid as a woman you should show anger or defensiveness, you know. On top of that, as a woman, you have to deal with the re-traumatization of other women telling you that you're not in your divine feminine energy if you're being defensive, when in reality, that is your normal response to your environment. And it's very easy to say, yeah, but you can work on it. Yeah, sure. I'm not saying that you cannot work on it, but these are your early environment sets up your knee-jerk reactions. There's no way that if a little girl is raised in an abusive environment that she's going to be a soft, loving, Pollyanna, trusting little angel. No fucking way. Like, I mean, get it out of your brain. Maybe with a lot of healing, a lot of loving, and even, you know, here's the thing. These kinds of women generally require a lot of patience. No sudden movements, you know, men who are trained in handling dangerous animals, God knows what, that kind of thing. Maybe with enough healthy treatment and healthy loving behavior, they start to loosen up a little bit. But you need to understand where the person is coming from. One more idea because again, I've been all over the place and I'm pretty sure that I forgot to mention some ideas. As much as I wanted this video to be short, I just didn't manage to, you know, squeeze everything in, because there's a lot to talk about. And also, like I said, this is just a prequel to an astrology video where I'm going to talk about the actual astrological configurations that, you know, show mental health issues. But let me not digress. One final thing that I wanted to say is, like I mentioned, I genuinely think, no doubt in my mind, that even with mental health issues, if you have to deal with abusive individuals, narcissists, I don't know, any kind of abusive individual, people who gaslight you, people who further re-traumatize you, people who ignore your suffering, people who make fun of your suffering, who try to humiliate you, people who use your vulnerabilities against you. Literally, there's nothing worse than this. It's much better to be alone than to be around these individuals. I speak from very real personal experience. Like I said, I had a little taste of having this kind of an experience in recent history this year, and I already could see my mental health declining, despite the progress that I had seen in the past, like 1.5 years or so. As soon as I became in contact with a narcissistic person, I could see that I was already being re-traumatized, and I started having insomnia again. I started having bad dreams again. And I was like, no, like, I couldn't wait to be alone. Even though, again, before having this interaction, I was kind of like lonely and sad, and I was like, finally I'm gonna live under the same roof as other people, and it's gonna be a nice change from my loneliness. Within, a month, I was like, I don't know about this. I was like back to, I want to be alone. I just want to be alone. But here's the reality of the situation. That being said, though, the kind of people that you want to surround yourself by, if you are lucky enough to find them, are people who are very healing, people who are understanding, who listen to you, who are not judgmental, especially if you have very serious mental issues like caused by traumas, by high anxiety, stuff like this, or you're in a very defensive state. The last thing that you need is someone who's going to try to push your buttons or challenge you into confrontations, or basically, like I said, anyone who's either narcissistic or dark triad or just plain immature. Okay, just as a final note, and this is the reason why mental health is rampant in the world. It's because the environment further encourages mental illness. So even when you are, just think about the fact that, again, speaking from my experience, I was breaking away from a family that treated me not great, to put it mildly. And I didn't have anywhere to go. I did not have, it's not like I had a healthy society that was welcoming me with open arms. Quite the contrary. And this is just one of the reasons why it's so unfair, why the world is so unfair to place all of this emphasis on the family system. Because like I said, it's like Russian roulette. Like if you're lucky to be born into a healthy family, good. And if you're not, you're screwed for life, because the rest of society does not want you to heal. And in fact, when you enter the greater world, the world at large, you're actually going to come across plenty of people who can't wait to take advantage of your traumas, who take advantage of your vulnerabilities, especially if you're a woman, because like men don't have to worry about their safety nowhere near as much as a woman. I am still lucky. I consider myself lucky simply because I'm intelligent, and I know I'm not modest. I know my strengths. I know myself very well because I've been through a lot of shit. That's one of the perks you get. And I'm very intelligent, and I was very intelligent from a young age. And so I started to catch on to different toxic behaviors, even when I was not reading psychology, even when, nobody told me, hey, this is a narcissist, or hey, this person's trying to cheat you. It was my instinct. It was my logical ability. It was my ability to put the, two and two together and draw a conclusion that kept me safe from a lot of predatory individuals. Because when I look back at, the way I was in my teens, in my 20s, there were plenty of instances, for instance, where men who are disgusting and toxic showed me interest. And if I had been truly a weak person who had just given into the longing for belonging and, wanting to have a relationship, which I definitely felt, I'm not trying to, I have the ability to be rational, but that doesn't mean that I don't have feelings or that I don't have the same instincts. But I was conscious, even when I was feeling the pain of like, okay, I don't have a family, I don't have a sense of belonging. And I genuinely felt like that for a very long time. I still had the common sense to realize that I had to be cautious of people who might try to exploit me, who might try to, portray themselves as kind of the wolves in sheep's clothing, and try to gain my trust. So the bottom line is, though, I think the way to heal, it's unfortunate. I think it's really hard if you don't have a supportive environment. But even if you don't have a supportive environment, you have to do the best you can to heal yourself as much as possible. Just focus on, and again, don't gaslight yourself. Don't allow other people to gaslight you, not even your doctors. If something is not making you happy emotionally, if you see that you have a bad reaction to a drug or anything, then avoid it, or at least look into why you're having a bad reaction. Don't just sit there and suffer in silence. This is what I'm trying to say. But other than that, I wish that I could, say that there's just one simple solution to mental health issues. I really don't think that there is a simple solution, because the whole world is insane. The whole world is insane. I've talked about this in multiple other videos, especially as a woman. I've said this before. Women right now are being systematically encouraged to walk over their biological instincts. They're being told that they cannot ask for security in relationships. They're expected to make themselves vulnerable and, be sexually promiscuous in order to attract a man's security, when it's their natural biological wiring that they need to feel safe in a relationship. They need to have security before they can make themselves sexually vulnerable. And yet women are systematically told that this is quote unquote liberation, that this is a sign of independence. There are women out there who are literally bragging about having sex without getting emotionally involved. Like, what do you want, a cookie? Honestly, even if you're a man and you're having sex without being emotionally involved, that's not healthy. That's not in a health, men who are psychopathic, insane, who hate their mothers, have all kinds of mental problems. Those are the kinds of men who are bragging about how many women they sleep with without getting emotionally involved. Just one example. This is one example in many, talking about the relationship aspect. On top of that, of course, the fact that people are not getting a sense of belonging, that their social circles are getting smaller and smaller, because unlike for most of human history, we are not part of small communities where everyone knows everyone. families are not as large as they used to be, and they're not as tightly knit as they used to be, because society at large does everything to divide people, to pit people against each other, even within the same family. Sibling rivalry and competition for resources and all this shit. So yeah, I don't think there's an easy solution in sight, but the first step is to become aware of the problem and to understand the problem very well, because otherwise you're definitely not going to be able to work towards a solution. And again, if you're single, just do the best you can with what you have. Just, meet your own needs. Be gentle with yourself. Don't be critical. That was a huge thing for me. I think I mentioned it, because I was constantly criticized and shamed for all kinds of things. And I got to a point where right now I'm shameless. I'm totally like, I do all kinds of stupid shit, but I don't dwell on it. I forgive myself for stuff. Like, I've gone through like Mr. Bean scenarios in my life where, especially again, where because of my ADHD and my tendency to be scattered and all this shit, I've made some all kinds of like silly mistakes or things that I guess some people may have thought as embarrassing or kind of like whatever. And I don't shame myself about it. And I don't want to be around people who are uptight and they think that all kinds of bullshit non-problems are real problems. And they think about shaming anyone for every stupid mistake, for every little small pointless mistake that has no serious consequences. You know what I mean? I don't do that anymore. I'm way nicer to myself, and it has helped a lot, because if I would have been stuck in my parents' programming of telling me how dumb and how I was dumb and I couldn't get anything right, do you think I would have made it? Shit. Like, whatever. Won't get into it. And not just my parents, by the way. I've had to deal with all kinds of naysayers and all kinds of idiots. But yeah, these are just my thoughts so far. And again, I don't want to continue because I might be rambling. And yes, like I said, there's a lot to be said about this topic. I just wanted to skim the surface, give you some ideas to create a prequel about my take on mental health, so that I'm probably gonna be referencing things from this video when I do the more specifically astrological video, where I'm also going to get into analyzing the horoscopes of some famous people who have had mental health illness. Sorry. And by the way, if you have, some names of famous people that have had mental illness, whose times of birth are known and dates of birth and all that, feel free to mention them in the comments. I might include them in the video. So yeah. But this has been it. And again, thank you very much for anyone who listens to the whole thing, or even if you listen to just little parts of it. I'm very grateful, and I hope that this video was useful to at least some people who maybe related to some stuff or learned some things that were useful. And as usual, comment in the comment section. I would love to hear feedback or ideas or debates or anything about the topic of mental health or experiences or people that who have gone through similar things. Would love to hear about it. And this has been it. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you at my next video. Bye.